Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a dusty rider who claimed he'd been paid double to deliver it personally to Jake Quinlan at the Double Q Ranch. Jake stood on his porch, one boot propped against the railing, and turned the envelope over in his calloused hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looping, and elaborate. His older brother Caleb leaned against the doorframe behind him. "Well, you going to open it or just stare at it until sundown?" Caleb asked. Jake tore open the envelope and read the contents twice before the words fully registered. His jaw tightened. "It's from Marcus Hendricks. You remember him from the cattle drive to Cheyenne last year. The loud one with more money than sense." "That's him." Jake crumpled the letter in his fist. "He's sending me a mail-order bride." Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "Sending you what now?" "As a joke, apparently. Says here he remembers me saying I'd never marry, that the frontier is no place for softness or sentiment. So he's arranged for some woman to arrive next week as a gift to prove his point that I'm too hard and set in my ways for any woman to tolerate." Jake's voice dripped with disgust. "He's treating a human being like a punchline." At 25, Jake Quinlan had carved out a respectable life from unforgiving Wyoming soil. The Double Q Ranch ran 300 head of cattle, employed 6 ranch hands, and was slowly becoming one of the more prosperous operations in the territory. Jake himself was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his weathered Stetson and a clean-shaven face that showed his youth despite the hard lines around his eyes. Women in Sweetwater Creek certainly noticed him, but Jake kept his distance. He'd learned young that attachment was a liability. When he was 15, he'd watched his parents die of cholera within days of each other. The grief had nearly broken him and Caleb both. They'd survived by becoming hard, by focusing solely on work and survival. Jake told himself that love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. People died too easily out here. Caring too much only left you vulnerable to a pain that could destroy you. "So what are you going to do?" Caleb asked. "Turn her around the moment she steps off the stage?" Jake stared at the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent behind the Medicine Bow Mountains. "I'll have to explain the situation, apologize for Hendricks being a fool, and give her enough money to get herself settled somewhere proper, maybe back east where she belongs." "Seems a shame," Caleb mused. "Long journey just to be sent back." "It's a shame Hendricks thought this was funny," Jake snapped. "Using some poor woman as the butt of his joke. I don't need this complication. We've got the autumn gather coming up, the fence line needs repairs, and we're short 2 hands since Pete and Jimmy headed to the silver mines." What Jake didn't say was that the thought of a woman arriving specifically for him made something uncomfortable twist in his chest. A longing he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist, but wanting something didn't make it right or possible. The frontier had taught him that the only thing you could count on was your own strength and solitude. Anything else was a risk he wouldn't take. The week passed in a blur of hard work and harder thoughts. Jake found himself snapping at the ranch hands, riding fence line alone more than necessary, and avoiding Caleb's knowing looks. On Friday morning, he bathed in the creek, shaved carefully, and put on his newest shirt, the blue one without any patches or fraying at the collar. He told himself it was simple courtesy, nothing more. The stagecoach was due at noon. Jake rode into Sweetwater Creek an hour early and spent the time pacing outside the general store, ignoring the curious glances from townsfolk who weren't accustomed to seeing him agitated. The town wasn't much to look at. A single main street with a dozen businesses, a small church, a saloon, and maybe 70 permanent residents if you counted generously. But it was home, and it was predictable, and predictable meant safe. The stage arrived in a cloud of dust and thundering hooves. Jake's stomach knotted as the driver climbed down and opened the door. An elderly couple emerged first, followed by a traveling salesman with an overstuffed carpetbag. Then a woman appeared in the doorway. She was younger than Jake expected, perhaps 22 or 23, with honey blonde hair pinned up under a simple straw bonnet. Her dress was gray cotton, worn but clean, with careful stitches visible where it had been mended more than once. She wasn't the pampered city lady he'd imagined. As she stepped down, clutching a small carpetbag that appeared to contain all her worldly possessions, Jake saw her hands trembling slightly. Their eyes met, hers were blue, the color of Wyoming sky in autumn, and they held a mixture of hope and terror that hit Jake square in the chest. "Mr. Quinlan," her voice was soft but steady, "I'm Diana Denholm." Jake removed his hat. Up close he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the thinness of her frame suggesting recent hunger, and the way she held herself with dignity despite obvious fear. This wasn't a woman who'd been sent as a joke. This was a woman who'd been given this opportunity as a lifeline and taken it because she had no other choice. "Miss Denholm," he said carefully, "we need to talk." Something flickered in her eyes, resignation maybe, like she'd expected this. "Of course." He led her to the small restaurant attached to the hotel, very aware of curious eyes following them. Once they were seated in a corner booth with coffee neither of them touched, Jake struggled to find the right words. "I need to explain something," he began. "The man who arranged your passage here, Marcus Hendricks, he did it as a prank. He and I had a disagreement last year about marriage and the frontier, and this was his idea of proving a point. I had nothing to do with this arrangement, didn't ask for a bride, and I'm sorry you've been put in this position." Diana's face remained carefully neutral, but her hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I see. I want to make this right," Jake continued. "I'll pay for a return ticket anywhere you want to go, or set you up with enough money to get settled here in town if you prefer. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson. She's decent folk, or if you have family back east." "I don't have family anywhere," Diana said quietly, "and there's nothing back east for me. That's why I answered the advertisement, Mr. Hendricks placed." "What advertisement?" "In the Philadelphia newspaper, seeking a bride for a prosperous Wyoming rancher. It said you were looking for a woman of good character who didn't mind hard work and frontier life." She reached into her bag and pulled out a clipping. "This one." Jake read it, his anger at Hendricks rising with every word. The man had gone far beyond a simple prank. He'd placed a legitimate-sounding advertisement, conducted correspondence, and lured a woman halfway across the country. "This is worse than I thought. Hendricks has crossed a line. Mr. Quinlan, may I be honest with you?" "Please." Diana met his eyes directly. "6 months ago, I was working in a textile mill in Philadelphia. The conditions were terrible, the pay barely enough to afford a room I shared with 3 other girls. Then the mill owners brought in new machines and let half of us go. I spent 3 months looking for work and using up what little savings I had. I was 2 weeks from ending up on the streets when I saw Mr. Hendricks' advertisement." She took a shaky breath. "I know you didn't ask for me to come here. I know this is all some cruel joke on his part. But I have $1.37 to my name, no employment prospects, and nowhere else to go. So before you send me away out of pity or obligation, I'm asking you to consider an alternative." Jake leaned back, studying her. "What kind of alternative?" "Let me stay and work," Diana said. "Not as your bride, I'm not asking for that, but you said yourself you're short 2 ranch hands. I'm strong, I learn quickly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I can cook, clean, mend, garden, handle chickens and livestock. Pay me wages like any other worker. Let me earn my keep honestly. Ranch work isn't like factory work, Miss Denholm. No, it's outside in the fresh air, instead of inside breathing cotton dust for 16 hours a day." "That sounds like heaven to me." Her chin lifted slightly. "Give me 1 month to prove myself. If I can't handle the work, then I'll accept your charity and let you send me wherever you think best. But give me the chance to stand on my own feet first." Jake should have said no. Every rational part of his brain told him this was a complication he didn't need. But something in Diana's voice, the fierce pride mixed with desperate hope, reminded him of himself at 15, insisting to skeptical neighbors that he and Caleb could make the ranch work without their parents. Someone had given him that chance. An old rancher named Tom Sullivan had hired them for a cattle drive when everyone else said they were too young and too grief-stricken to be reliable. "1 month," Jake heard himself say. "You'll stay in the spare room in the main house. We keep proper hours and proper behavior. There's me, my brother Caleb, and 6 ranch hands who bunk in the barn. You'll help with cooking, garden work, and whatever other tasks need doing around the house and yard. If you can prove you're pulling your weight, we'll discuss wages and a more permanent arrangement." The relief that flooded Diana's face was so profound, it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you, Mr. Quinlan, I promise you won't regret this." But as Jake paid for the coffee and helped Diana load her single carpetbag onto his horse, he suspected he might already be regretting it, just not in the way she meant. Because in that brief conversation, Diana Denholm had already started chipping away at the careful walls he'd built around himself. And that was dangerous territory for a man who'd spent 10 years convincing himself that solitude was strength. The ride to the Double Q took 90 minutes. Diana sat behind Jake on his horse, her hands tentatively holding his waist, her carpetbag secured behind the saddle. Jake pointed out landmarks as they rode. The creek where the ranch got its water, the line of cottonwoods that marked the eastern boundary, the hills where they grazed cattle in summer. Diana asked intelligent questions about the land and the operation, and Jake found himself answering more expansively than he'd intended. As they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Diana gasped softly, "It's beautiful." Jake saw it through her eyes, the main house built of weathered wood with a wide porch. The barn and outbuildings arranged in a neat semicircle, the corrals where horses grazed, the garden plot showing the last of the summer vegetables, and beyond it all, the endless Wyoming landscape rolling toward distant mountains. It wasn't much by some standards, but Jake and Caleb had built it with their own hands, and it was theirs. "It's home," Jake said simply. Caleb came out of the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on his pants. His expression when he saw Diana was priceless, cycling through surprise, confusion, and then interest as he took in the young woman dismounting from Jake's horse. "Caleb, this is Miss Diana Denholm," Jake said. "She's going to be staying on for a month, helping out around the place. Miss Denholm, this is my brother Caleb." "Ma'am," Caleb touched his hat, his eyes dancing with questions Jake would have to answer later. "Welcome to the Double Q." "Thank you," Diana said. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Jake showed Diana to the spare room, a small space off the kitchen that had served mostly for storage. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. "It's not much," he admitted. "It's perfect," Diana said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I've shared smaller spaces with 3 other women. Having a room to myself feels like luxury." "Supper's at 6. "I'll have Caleb bring in some water so you can freshen up." Jake paused in the doorway. "Miss Denholm, I meant what I said about proper behavior. The ranch hands are good men, but they're still men, and you're a woman alone out here. You have any trouble from anyone, you come to me or Caleb immediately." "I can handle myself, Mr. Quinlan, but I appreciate the concern." After Jake left, Diana sat on the bed and let herself shake for a minute, releasing the fear she'd held in check since leaving Philadelphia. This wasn't what she'd expected when she'd answered that advertisement, but it was infinitely better than the alternatives she'd been facing. She'd told Jake Quinlan the truth about her circumstances, but not the whole truth. She'd left out the mill foreman who'd made it clear she could keep her job if she provided him certain favors. She'd left out sleeping in a church doorway for 3 nights when she couldn't make rent. She'd left out the bone-deep terror of being completely alone in the world with no one to turn to. Diana had learned young that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. Her mother had died when she was 8, her father when she was 16. She'd been working since she was 12 years old, always just barely scraping by, always one disaster away from destitution. She'd answered that mail-order bride advertisement not because she believed in romantic love, but because she believed in survival. Marriage was a contract, and contracts at least were honest about expectations. But Jake Quinlan had offered her something different, not marriage but work, a chance to prove herself. Diana intended to take that chance and hold on to it with both hands. If she had to work twice as hard as any man on this ranch, she would. If she had to learn everything from scratch, she would, because the alternative was going back to the kind of life where every day was a fight just to stay alive and keep your dignity intact. She unpacked her few belongings, 2 spare dresses, some undergarments, a small sewing kit, a book of poetry that had been her mother's, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Then she washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair back more securely, and went to find the kitchen. If she was going to earn her place here, she might as well start immediately. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a good cast-iron stove, a long work table, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Diana found flour, salt pork, potatoes, and dried beans. She could work with that. By the time Caleb came in to tell her about supper, she had biscuits in the oven, beans soaking for tomorrow, and was peeling potatoes. "You don't have to start working today," Caleb said, but he looked pleased. "Jake just meant to get you settled." "I'm happier when I'm busy," Diana replied. "How many for supper?" "8 total, me and Jake, 6 hands. They usually eat in the bunkhouse, but Jake said to have them come up to the main house tonight so we can do introductions properly." "Then I'll need more potatoes." Caleb grabbed a knife and started helping her peel. "Can I ask you something, Miss Denholm? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want." "Go ahead." "That advertisement you answered. Did it really make Jake sound like he was looking for a wife?" "It did. It said you were a successful rancher, 30 years old, of good character, looking for a capable woman who wanted to build a life on the frontier." Diana glanced at him. "I'm guessing most of that was lies." "Jake's 25, not 30, and he's about as interested in marriage as a wild horse is in wearing a saddle. Our parents died when we were young, and Jake got it in his head that caring about people just sets you up for heartbreak. He's been married to this ranch and nothing else for the past 10 years. "That seems lonely," Diana said quietly. "It is, but try telling Jake that." Caleb set aside a peeled potato. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Not because of any matchmaking nonsense, but because this place could use a woman's touch. It's been just us men for a long time, and we're getting rough around the edges." Diana smiled. "I noticed the dust and cobwebs." "Yeah, we're not much for housekeeping." They worked in companionable silence for a while, then Caleb said, "Jake's a good man, Miss Denholm. Stubborn as hell and convinced he's got life all figured out, but good to his core. Whatever happens this month, you'll be treated fairly here." "That's all I'm asking for," Diana said. Supper that night was an education in frontier life. The ranch hands filed in at 6 sharp, hats in hands, eyes curious. Jake introduced them. Old Pete, a grizzled man in his 50s who'd been with the ranch since the beginning. Samuel and Thomas, brothers in their 30s who handled most of the horse breaking. Miguel, quiet and competent, and the youngest two, Red and Charlie, barely 20 and full of nervous energy around a woman. Diana served the meal she'd prepared: fried salt pork, mashed potatoes, biscuits, and coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who did hard physical labor all day. Diana noticed Jake watching her as she moved around the table, refilling coffee and bringing more biscuits from the oven. She couldn't quite read his expression. "These are fine biscuits, Miss Denholm," Old Pete said. "Light as clouds." "Thank you. My mother taught me to bake before I was tall enough to reach the table without a stool." "Where'd you learn to cook for a crowd?" Samuel asked. "At the mill, we took turns making meals for the other girls in our boarding house. Sometimes that meant stretching a pound of rice to feed 10 people. Diana smiled. "Cooking for 8 with actual supplies feels easy by comparison." After supper, the hands thanked her and headed back to the bunkhouse. Diana started clearing dishes, but Jake stopped her. "That can wait until morning. You've done enough for your first day." "I don't mind. Miss Denholm, if you're going to last a month here, you need to pace yourself. Frontier life has a way of grinding down people who try to do everything at once." His voice was gruff but not unkind. "Get some rest." Diana wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up to her. The journey from Philadelphia had taken 4 days on trains and another 3 on the stagecoach. She'd barely slept, too anxious about what she'd find at the end of the line. "All right, thank you, Mr. Quinlan. For everything. Just Jake is fine when it's not formal." "Then you should call me Diana." Something flickered in his eyes. "Good night, Diana." "Good night." In her small room, Diana lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Horses moving in the corral, a coyote calling in the distance, the wind through the cottonwoods. It was so different from the constant noise of the city. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace settle over her. But peace was dangerous, she reminded herself. Peace made you complacent, made you think you could stay somewhere, build something permanent. Diana had learned that lesson over and over. The only constant in life was change, usually for the worse. She had 1 month to prove herself indispensable to the Double Q Ranch. After that, she'd see. But she wouldn't let herself hope for more than that. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. In his own room down the hall, Jake lay awake and tried not to think about the woman now sleeping under his roof. He'd done the right thing, the decent thing, giving Diana a chance to work for her keep. It was practical. They did need help around the place. Having someone to cook proper meals and handle the endless domestic tasks that he and Caleb neglected would make the ranch run smoother. But there was nothing practical about the way his pulse had jumped when Diana smiled at old Pete's compliment. Nothing practical about noticing the graceful way she moved around the kitchen or the fierce intelligence in her blue eyes. Jake had spent a decade building walls around his heart, convincing himself he was content with solitude and work. Diana Denholm had been on his ranch for less than 8 hours, and already those walls felt thinner. He told himself it didn't matter. In a month, she'd either prove capable and stay on as a paid employee, a business arrangement like any other, or she'd realize ranch life wasn't for her and move on. Either way, Jake would make sure his feelings stayed locked down tight. He'd survived losing everyone he'd ever loved. He'd be damned if he'd open himself up to that kind of pain again. But as Jake finally drifted toward sleep, his last thought was of Diana's face when she'd seen the ranch for the first time, the wonder in her expression as she'd whispered that it was beautiful. And some traitorous part of his heart whispered back that maybe, just maybe, solitude wasn't the same thing as strength after all. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Diana threw herself into ranch life with determination that impressed even old Pete, who'd seen countless greenhorns come and go over the years. She was up before dawn to start coffee and breakfast, spent her days tackling the neglected housework, tending the garden, feeding chickens, and preparing meals that had the ranch hands singing her praises. By nightfall, she was exhausted but satisfied. Jake watched her more than he meant to. He told himself he was just making sure she wasn't overdoing it, that she was settling in properly. But he noticed things that had nothing to do with work ethic. The way she hummed while kneading bread, how she saved kitchen scraps for the chickens and had already named every one of them, the quick smile she gave when someone thanked her for a meal. Diana was bringing life to the ranch in ways Jake hadn't realized were missing. On the 8th morning, Jake found her in the garden at sunrise, examining the plants with a critical eye. She'd tied her honey-blonde hair back with a simple ribbon, and her dress sleeves were rolled up to reveal slender forearms already showing the first signs of sun. "You're up early," he said. Diana straightened, shading her eyes to look at him. "This garden has good bones, but it needs attention. The squash plants have borers, the tomatoes need to be tied up properly, and there's a whole section that's gone to weeds. With your permission, I'd like to spend today getting it into better shape. If we're strategic, we could get a second planting of cool weather crops before the first frost. You know about gardening. My grandmother had a big garden when I was young. I used to help her every summer before she died." Diana crouched down to pull a weed. "A good garden can mean the difference between eating well and just surviving through winter. This soil is better than anything we had back east. Seems a shame to waste it." Jake found himself nodding. "Do what you think best. There's tools in the shed. If you need anything from town, let me know." "Actually," Diana said, "I was hoping you might teach me to ride. Walking everywhere is fine for now, but if I'm going to be useful here long-term, I should learn." "Long-term?" The words sent an unexpected warmth through Jake's chest. "You planning to stay past the month?" "If I can prove myself valuable enough that you'll want to keep me on." Diana met his eyes directly. "I like it here, Jake. I like the work, the land, the quiet. I'd like to stay if you'll have me." "We'll see how things go," Jake said, more gruffly than he intended. "Come down to the corral after breakfast. I'll start teaching you the basics." Diana's smile was like the sun coming out. "Thank you." Teaching Diana to ride turned out to be both easier and harder than Jake expected. She had no fear of the horses, approaching them with calm confidence that the animals responded to. She listened carefully to his instructions about mounting, sitting properly in the saddle, and handling the reins. Within an hour, she was walking her borrowed mare around the corral with reasonable competence. The hard part was being so close to her. Jake had to adjust her posture, show her the right grip, stay near in case she lost her balance. Every touch, however practical, sent awareness through him that he couldn't ignore. Diana smelled like sunshine and the lavender soap she used. Her waist under his steadying hands was small enough that his fingers nearly met. When she laughed at something the horse did, the sound made his chest tighten. "You're a natural," he said when the lesson ended. "Give it another week of practice and you'll be ready to ride out on the range." "I'd like that," Diana said, dismounting with only a little awkwardness. She patted the mare's neck affectionately. "What's her name?" "Doesn't have one, she's just one of the work horses." "Can I name her?" Jake shrugged, trying to seem casual about the way Diana was making everything on the ranch personal. "Sure. Then I'll call her Daisy. She has sweet eyes like a daisy flower." Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm developed. Mornings, Diana rode Daisy around the ranch property, gradually building confidence and skill. She'd pack lunches and ride out to wherever the men were working, bringing food and often staying to watch and ask questions about ranch operations. Jake found himself explaining things he'd never bothered putting into words before. How to read the weather, what made good grazing land, why they moved the cattle between different pastures. Diana absorbed everything like drought-parched soil soaking up rain. She learned to recognize signs of illness in livestock, helped treat a horse with colic, and didn't flinch when old Pete taught her how to kill and dress a chicken. She fixed a broken gate latch, repaired a tear in the barn roof, and somehow got the ancient washing machine working again. But it was the small moments that got under Jake's skin. Diana bringing him coffee when he was working late on the ranch accounts. The way she'd started leaving wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. How she'd befriend a half-wild barn cat that wouldn't let anyone else near it. The sound of her singing hymns while she worked, her voice clear and true. 3 weeks in, Jake realized he was in trouble. He'd started looking forward to meals because Diana would be there, found excuses to check on whatever project she was working on, noticed when she wasn't in sight and felt uneasy until he knew where she was. This wasn't just appreciation for a good worker, this was something much more dangerous. Caleb cornered him in the barn one evening. "You're falling for her." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, not looking up from the bridle he was mending. "The hell you don't. You watch her like a man dying of thirst watches a creek. And she watches you back the same way when you're not looking." Jake's hand stilled. "Diana watches me." "Like you're the only man in Wyoming Territory." Caleb sat down on a hay bale. "Would it really be so terrible? Letting yourself care about someone. You know why I can't do that." "I know why you think you can't, there's a difference." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "Jake, Ma and Pa dying nearly broke us both, I understand that. But they wouldn't have wanted us to spend our whole lives afraid to love anyone because we might lose them. That's not living, that's just existing. It's safer." "Safer isn't always better." Caleb stood and clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Diana's been here almost a month. Her trial period is about up. You need to make a decision about whether she stays, and I don't think that decision should be based on fear." After Caleb left, Jake sat alone in the barn, trying to untangle his thoughts. Everything Caleb said was true. Jake was falling for Diana, had probably already fallen. The question was what he intended to do about it. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to offer Diana a permanent position as housekeeper at fair wages, maintaining professional distance. She'd have security, he'd have help with the ranch, and they'd both protect their hearts. But the thought of Diana living under his roof, seeing her every day while keeping his feelings locked away, felt like a special kind of torture. The other option terrified him. Actually courting Diana, admitting he wanted more than an employee relationship, risking the possibility of building something real with another person. If he did that and lost her to illness or accident or any of the 100 ways the frontier killed people, it would destroy him. Jake knew that with bone-deep certainty, but a small voice in his head, growing louder by the day, asked, "What if you don't lose her? What if you get 50 years together? Are you really going to throw away that chance because you're afraid?" Jake didn't have an answer, not yet. The next afternoon, Jake had to ride into Sweetwater Creek for supplies. Diana asked if she could come along, saying she needed a few personal items from the general store. Jake agreed, telling himself it meant nothing that his heart lifted at the prospect of her company for the 2-hour round trip. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, Diana sitting easy in Daisy's saddle now, handling the horse with growing confidence. The late September air was crisp, hinting at the winter to come, and the aspens on the hillsides were turning gold. "It's almost October," Diana said. "I've been here a month." "I noticed. I want to stay, Jake." Permanently, if you'll have me. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere the way I belong here. Jake's throat tightened. You've done good work, more than proved yourself. If you want to stay on as housekeeper, I'll pay you fair wages and provide room and board. We can draw up a proper contract if you'd like. Is that what you want, a business arrangement? The question hung in the air between them. Jake stared at the horizon, struggling with words that had spent 10 years locked behind his ribs. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it. Diana pulled Daisy to a halt, forcing Jake to stop as well. When he turned to look at her, her blue eyes were blazing. I'm tired of dancing around this. I see the way you look at me. I feel something growing between us, and I think you feel it too. But every time we get close to acknowledging it, you pull back like you're afraid. I am afraid, Jake said, the admission torn from somewhere deep. Diana, I lost everyone I ever loved, my parents, both in the space of a week when I was 15. I watched them die and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I swore I'd never open myself up to that kind of pain again. It nearly killed me the first time. So you've spent 10 years alone. Is that really better? It's safer. It's half a life, Diana's voice softened. Jake, I understand fear. I've been afraid every day since I lost my parents, afraid of ending up with nothing and no one, afraid of trusting anyone because people leave or die or disappoint you. That's why I answered that advertisement. I thought marriage was just a practical arrangement, a way to be safe. I never expected to feel anything real. And now I'm more afraid of not taking this chance than I am of getting hurt. Diana urged Daisy closer until the horses were side by side. I care about you, Jake Quinlan. Maybe I'm a fool for admitting it, but I do. I care about your ranch, your brother, those ridiculous chickens, and most of all, I care about you. The question is whether you're brave enough to care back. Jake stared at her, this woman who'd arrived as a joke and become essential to his life in the space of a month. Diana was right, he was afraid. But he was also tired, so tired of being alone, of keeping everyone at arm's length, of pretending he didn't need anyone. And the truth was, he did care. He cared so much it terrified him. I don't know if I'm brave enough, he said hoarsely, but I'd like to try. Diana's smile was tremulous and bright. Then try, we'll both try, that's all we can do. Jake reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. Diana's fingers curled around his, warm and real and solid. For a long moment they just sat there, holding hands in the middle of the Wyoming prairie, while something fundamental shifted between them. We should probably still go to town for those supplies, Diana said eventually, but she was grinning. Probably, Jake agreed, grinning back. They rode the rest of the way hand in hand when the trail was wide enough, and Jake felt something in his chest loosen, a tightness he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing it. This was terrifying, but it also felt like coming home. In Sweetwater Creek, Jake helped Diana down from her horse with his hands on her waist, letting them linger a moment longer than necessary. Several townsfolk noticed and exchanged meaningful glances. News of Jake Quinlan courting someone would be all over town by nightfall. Let them talk, Diana said, seeing his hesitation. Doesn't bother you. Jake, I've been talked about my whole life. Orphan girl, factory worker, mail-order bride who arrived for a man who didn't want her. If people want to add woman Jake Quinlan is courting to that list, I'll wear it with pride. They were in the general store, Diana examining fabric for new curtains, when trouble walked through the door. Marcus Hendricks was a big man dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place in frontier Wyoming, his face florid and his manner loud. He spotted Jake immediately. Quinlan. I heard you might be in town today. Hendricks strode over, grinning widely. Tell me, did my little gift arrive? Has she given up and headed back east yet? I've been waiting to hear how that worked out. Jake felt rage flash through him, hot and immediate. His fist clenched and he took a step forward before Diana's hand on his arm stopped him. Your gift arrived safe, Mr. Hendricks, Diana said coolly. Though I have to say, using a human being as the punchline to a joke shows remarkably poor character. Hendricks' eyes widened as he took in Diana. Well now, you lasted longer than I expected. Most women take one look at Quinlan and his hardscrabble ranch and run for civilization. Then most women don't know a good thing when they see it, Diana replied. Jake's ranch is prosperous and well-run, and he himself is worth 10 of men who think other people's lives are amusing diversions. You should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed, Hendricks' face reddened. Listen here, Missy, I did you a favor. Found you a place out here when you clearly had nowhere else to go. A little gratitude would be appropriate. You lied to both of us, manipulated us for your own entertainment, and showed complete disregard for the consequences of your actions. Diana's voice was quiet but fierce. That doesn't deserve gratitude, it deserves contempt. Jake had heard enough. Hendricks, you crossed a line. That advertisement you placed, the letters you wrote pretending to be me, all of it was fraud. I could bring charges if I wanted to. You wouldn't dare. Try me, but I'll give you one chance to walk away. Don't ever contact me again, don't mention Diana's name, and stay far away from anything connected to the double Q. Do that, and I won't make an issue of what you've done. Hendricks looked between them, seeming to realize for the first time that his joke had backfired spectacularly. Fine, consider me gone. Though I still say you're both taking this far too seriously. It was just a bit of fun. Fun is when everyone's laughing, Diana said. This was cruelty. After Hendricks left, the store was silent. Then the shopkeeper, Mrs. Chen, spoke up from behind her counter. Well said, Miss Denholm. That man's been insufferable every time he comes through town. Someone needed to put him in his place. Several other customers murmured agreement. Jake realized that the confrontation had turned into a public declaration of sorts. He defended Diana's honor, she defended his character, and everyone in Sweetwater Creek now knew they were together. Guess the cat's out of the bag, he said quietly to Diana as they paid for their purchases. Is that a problem? Jake thought about it, then shook his head. No. No, it's not a problem at all. On the ride home, Jake felt oddly lighter. Confronting Hendricks had been satisfying, but more than that, standing beside Diana while they faced him together had felt right, natural. Like they were already a unit, a team. Thank you, he said, for what you said back there about me and the ranch. I meant every word. The double Q is a good place, and you're a good man. Anyone who can't see that is a fool. Diana, there's something I need to tell you about why I'm so afraid of losing people. Jake took a breath. When my parents got sick, I was sure I could save them. I rode into town for the doctor, nursed them day and night, prayed every prayer I knew, but they died anyway. For a long time, I thought if I'd just been better, smarter, faster, I could have prevented it. That it was somehow my fault. Oh, Jake. Caleb finally made me see that some things are beyond our control, but I never got past the fear that if I loved someone again, I'd lose them too, and it would break me. So I just decided not to love anyone, thought that would keep me safe. Diana was quiet for a moment, then she said, my mother used to tell me that love is always a risk. But it's also the only thing that makes life worth living. The years I had with my parents were hard sometimes, but they were full of love and I wouldn't trade them for anything, even knowing how much it hurt when they died. You're braver than I am. I don't think so. I think we're both scared and both trying anyway. That's what courage is. They were almost back to the ranch when Diana pulled Daisy to a halt near the creek. Can we stop here for a minute? Jake nodded, dismounting and then helping Diana down. They led the horses to the water to drink. The afternoon sun was golden, the creek babbled over smooth stones, and the air smelled of sage and autumn leaves. I love this spot, Diana said. Sometimes I come here in the evenings just to think. It's always been one of my favorites, too. Diana turned to face him, and Jake's breath caught at the expression in her eyes. Jake, I need to say something, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that? He nodded. I know we've only known each other a month. I know this is fast and probably foolish, but I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. Diana stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. I love you. I love your dedication to this ranch, the way you care for your brother and your men, your quiet kindness. I love how hard you work and how much integrity you have. I love that you're afraid but trying anyway. I just love you, Jake Quinlan, and I don't care if it's too soon to say it. Jake's heart was thundering so hard he could barely hear anything else. Diana. You don't have to say it back, I'm not asking for that. I just needed you to know. But Jake realized he did want to say it back because it was true. Somewhere in the past month, without him noticing exactly when, he'd fallen completely in love with this fierce, brave, determined woman who'd arrived as a joke and stayed because she saw something worth having. He'd fallen in love with her work ethic, her kindness to his men, her quick mind, her laughter, the way she brought light to every corner of his life. "I love you too," he said, and the words came easier than he'd expected. "I fought it, tried to convince myself it wasn't happening, but I love you, Diana. You scare me to death and make me happier than I've been in 10 years, and I don't know how to reconcile those two things." "You don't have to reconcile them. Just let yourself feel both." Diana smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "We can be scared together." Jake pulled her into his arms, and Diana came willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other beside the creek while the horses grazed peacefully nearby. Jake felt something fundamental shift inside him, the final wall around his heart crumbling. This was terrifying, but it was also perfect. When they finally pulled apart, Jake kept one arm around Diana's shoulders and she leaned into him naturally. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Well, we can't keep living in the same house if we're courting properly. It wouldn't be decent." Diana's face fell. "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." But Jake continued, "If we were engaged, that would be different. You'd be family then, could stay at the ranch while we prepare for a wedding." Diana's eyes widened. "Jake Quinlan, are you proposing to me?" "I don't have a ring. I'm standing in creek mud instead of on one knee. And I'm doing a terrible job of this." Jake took both her hands. "But yes, I'm proposing. Diana Denholm, I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I love you and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Diana said immediately. "Yes, absolutely yes." Jake kissed her then, there by the creek with the horses as witnesses, and it was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should probably tell Caleb," Diana said, "and I suppose we need to plan a wedding." "Nothing fancy, just family and friends. Maybe at the ranch." "That sounds perfect." They rode home together, talking excitedly about plans and possibilities, the fear that had governed Jake's life for a decade finally loosening its grip. When they reached the ranch, Caleb took one look at their faces and whooped with joy. "Finally, I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other." He pulled Jake into a hug, then Diana. "Welcome to the family, sister." That evening, they told the ranch hands over supper. Old Pete raised his coffee cup in a toast. About time someone tamed Jake's stubborn heart. "Congratulations to both of you." The next few weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Diana sewed a new dress, simple but beautiful, from fabric Mrs. Chen's special ordered. Jake rode into town to speak with the circuit preacher about performing the ceremony. Caleb organized the ranch hands to spruce up the property, whitewashing the barn and building an arbor for Diana to stand under during the ceremony. But amid the happiness, Jake felt old fears creeping back. What if something happened to Diana? What if he wasn't a good enough husband? What if he lost her the way he'd lost his parents? One night, a week before the wedding, he sat on the porch unable to sleep, wrestling with doubts. Diana found him there, wrapped in a shawl against the October chill. "Can't sleep. Thinking too much." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "About what?" "All the ways this could go wrong." "Jake, there are always ways things can go wrong. That's life, especially out here, but there are also ways things can go right." Diana squeezed his hand. "I could get sick, you could get hurt, the ranch could fail, or we could have 50 wonderful years together, raise children, build something beautiful. We don't know which future we'll get, but I'd rather take the risk than live half a life. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't make you happy? You already make me happy. The question is whether you can let yourself be happy too." Jake pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "I want to, God, I want to." "Then do it. Choose happiness, Jake. Choose us." And sitting there on the porch of the ranch he'd built from grief and determination, holding the woman who'd come into his life as a joke and become his whole world, Jake finally did. He chose to believe that love was stronger than fear, that Diana would stay, that they'd build a life together, that opening his heart was worth the risk. "I love you," he said. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Diana said. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Jake Quinlan. The wedding took place on a perfect October morning, with the aspens at peak gold and the Wyoming sky impossibly blue. Diana wore her new dress, honey blonde hair crowned with wildflowers. Jake wore his Sunday best, freshly shaved and so handsome that Diana's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the arbor. Caleb stood as best man and Mrs. Chen from the general store stood with Diana. The ranch hands and townspeople who'd made the journey formed a small but warm congregation. The circuit preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Walsh, kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for vows, Jake spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the gathering. Diana, I promise to love you through every season, good and hard. I promise to be brave enough to let you in, to trust you with my heart, and to build a life with you that honors what we both survived to get here. You came into my life when I'd convinced myself I didn't need anyone, and you proved me wrong in the best possible way. I love you, and I'll spend my life showing you that every day. Diana's eyes were bright with tears. Jake, I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner in this life we're building, to bring light to the hard days and share the joy of the good ones. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go, and more than that, you gave me your heart. I love you, and I'll treasure that gift for as long as I live. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Walsh said with a smile. Jake, you may kiss your bride. Jake did tenderly and thoroughly while the gathering cheered. When they broke apart, both were grinning. Diana Quinlan, she thought, testing the name in her mind. It sounded exactly right. The celebration afterward was simple but joyous. The ranch hands had set up tables in the yard, and the townsfolk had brought food to share. There was fiddle music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Old Pete made a speech about how the double Q had needed a woman's touch, and Diana had brought life back to the place. Mrs. Chen gave them a beautiful quilt she'd made. Caleb's toast was simple, to my brother who finally figured out that stubbornness is only a virtue when applied to the right things, and to Diana, who was brave enough to see the good in him even when he couldn't see it himself. As the sun set and the party continued, Jake pulled Diana away for a moment of privacy. They stood on the porch watching the golden light paint the mountains, and Jake wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. Happy? Diana asked, leaning back against him. Terrified, Jake admitted, but yes, happy. The good kind of terrified, the kind that means something matters. I know what you mean. Diana, thank you. For what? For being brave when I was scared, for seeing something in this place and in me worth staying for. For not giving up when I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me. Diana turned in his arms to face him. Jake Quinlan, you were never stupid. You were hurt and protecting yourself the only way you knew how. But you let me in anyway, and that took more courage than you give yourself credit for. We're going to be all right, aren't we, you and me? Better than all right, we're going to be happy. Diana kissed him softly. Because we both know what it's like to be alone, and we choose each other instead. That's a strong foundation. As night fell and stars emerged over the Wyoming Territory, Jake held his wife and felt something he hadn't experienced since before his parents died. Absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Diana had arrived as a joke, sent by a cruel man who thought loneliness was funny, but she'd stayed because she'd seen past Jake's walls to the heart underneath. And in seeing him, she'd saved him. The party wound down eventually. The guests departed with final congratulations. The ranch hands headed to the bunkhouse, and Caleb diplomatically announced he'd sleep in the barn tonight to give the newlyweds privacy. Finally, Jake and Diana were alone. They stood in the house that was now truly theirs together, and Jake felt his heart so full it almost hurt. Mrs. Quinlan, he said, trying out the name. Mr. Quinlan, Diana replied, her smile bright. I love you. I love you too, and Jake, thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. Best decision I ever made, Jake said, and he meant it with everything in him. That night, as they began their life together, both Jake and Diana felt the weight of their respective pasts finally lift. They'd both been alone, afraid, certain that safety meant keeping everyone at a distance. But they'd found each other, two wounded souls who discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. The first year of their marriage was an education in partnership. Diana learned ranching from the ground up, becoming as competent with cattle and horses as she was with cooking and gardening. Jake learned to share his burdens, to talk about his fears and hopes instead of keeping them locked inside. Together, they made the Double Q more prosperous than it had ever been. When Diana announced she was expecting their first child in the spring of 1880, Jake felt the old fear try to resurface. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her in childbirth, the way so many men lost their wives on the frontier? But Diana, wise beyond her years, took his face in her hands and said, "We're going to be afraid sometimes, Jake. That's part of loving someone, but we don't let the fear win. We choose hope instead." Their daughter, Sarah Rose Quinlan, was born on a May morning with Caleb pacing nervously outside and old Pete boiling water he wasn't even sure was needed. When Jake held his daughter for the first time, tiny and perfect and squalling with indignation at the world, he wept. Diana, exhausted but radiant, smiled at him from the bed. "We made her," she said wonderingly. "This beautiful little life." "You're amazing," Jake said hoarsely, "both of you." 2 years later, a son arrived, James Thomas Quinlan, named for Jake's father, then another daughter, Elizabeth Ann. The house that had once held just two grieving brothers filled with laughter, toys, and the chaos of young children. Jake learned that love didn't make you weaker, it made you stronger, fiercer, more determined to build something lasting. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake and Diana stood together in the same spot by the creek where they'd first admitted their love. Their children played nearby, supervised by Caleb, who'd become the doting uncle and had never married himself, claiming 3 nieces and nephews were enough excitement for any man. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked Diana, "answering that advertisement, coming here?" Diana turned to him, and in her eyes he saw the same fierce love that had been there on their wedding day, not for a single moment. "This life, this family, it's everything I never knew I needed. I was so stupid back then, so convinced that staying alone was strength. You were hurt, we both were, but we healed each other, Jake. That's the point of love, isn't it? Finding someone who sees your wounds and helps you become whole again." Jake pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Marcus Hendricks sent you as a joke, trying to prove I was too hard for any woman to tolerate. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift of my life. I should probably write him a thank you note." Diana laughed. "Don't you dare, let him think his joke failed. He doesn't deserve to know how happy we are." "Fair point." They stood there watching their children play, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, and Jake felt profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought Diana to his door. She'd arrived with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope. He'd been broken, convinced that solitude was safety, but together they'd built something neither could have imagined alone. The Double Q prospered over the years. As Wyoming moved from territory to statehood, as the frontier gradually became less wild, Jake and Diana's ranch grew and adapted. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning from both parents the values of hard work, integrity, and the courage to love even when it's frightening. Jake never did completely lose his fear of losing Diana. But he learned to live with it, to recognize that the fear was simply the shadow side of love. Every morning he woke up beside her was a gift. Every evening they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over the land they'd built together, was a victory over the loneliness that had once defined them both. Diana, for her part, never forgot what it felt like to have nothing and no one. That memory kept her compassionate. Over the years, she and Jake took in 3 more young people who arrived in Wyoming Territory with more hope than resources, giving them work and a place to belong, just as Jake had once done for her. On their 25th anniversary, their children now grown, Jake presented Diana with a gift. It was a new sign for the ranch gate, beautifully carved, reading Double Q Ranch, established 1873, home of Jake and Diana Quinlan. "I wanted your name there," Jake said. "Equal to mine, because everything we built together." Diana traced the letters of her name, tears streaming down her face. "You know what I love most about this? It's proof that we existed, that our story happened. 2 broken people who found each other and built something beautiful." "Best story I know," Jake agreed. As they stood together, aged now but still strong, still in love, still choosing each other every day, Diana thought about the frightened girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach 25 years ago. That girl had been sent as a joke, as a prank to humiliate a stubborn rancher, but Jake had seen past the circumstances to her heart. He'd seen her worth when she'd been at her lowest, and he'd given her a chance to prove herself. And Diana had seen Jake's heart too, buried under years of grief and self-protection. She'd seen the good man hiding behind walls, and she'd loved him anyway, patiently and persistently until those walls came down. They'd saved each other, really. Two people who'd learned the hard way that life was unpredictable and often cruel. Two people who'd decided that taking the risk of love was better than the certainty of loneliness. Two people who'd built a family, a home, and a legacy from nothing but determination and the courage to be vulnerable. The sun set over the Wyoming landscape they both loved, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Their children would visit tomorrow with their own families, the grandchildren Jake had never imagined he'd have. The double queue would continue, passed down through generations, each one learning the story of how it all began. With a joke that became a love story, with a woman sent in mockery who became the heart of a ranch and a family, with a cowboy who thought he was too broken to love, and a woman who proved him wonderfully wrong. Jake took Diana's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing after 25 years of practice. Ready to go inside, Mrs. Quinlan. Always, Mr. Quinlan. Always. And hand in hand they walked toward home, toward the life they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work, and the revolutionary decision to let themselves love and be loved in return. The frontier had tried to make them hard and isolated. Instead, they'd made each other whole. It was, Jake thought as they climbed the porch steps together, the best possible ending to a story that had started as someone's cruel joke. Because Marcus Hendricks had been wrong about everything. The frontier was exactly the place for love. Jake wasn't too hard or too set in his ways, and Diana Denholm hadn't been a punchline. She'd been a blessing, a partner, a wife, and the answer to questions Jake hadn't even known he was asking. As they settled into their chairs on the porch, neither ready quite yet to go inside despite the autumn chill, Diana leaned her head on Jake's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked. "Everything, nothing, how lucky we are, how easily this all could have gone differently if either of us had been too afraid to try. But we weren't. You were brave first, though. I was still hiding when you told me you loved me by the creek that day. You were brave when it counted, that's what matters," Diana smiled. "You know what I think some things are just meant to be. Maybe Marcus Hendricks thought he was playing a joke, but maybe fate was using him to bring us together. We might never have found each other otherwise." "That's an awful lot of credit to give fate," Jake said, but he was smiling too. Maybe the universe knew two lonely people needed each other and found a way to make it happen, even if the path there was unconventional. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Inside the house, the clock chimed 9. They should go to bed soon. Morning came early on a working ranch, and even at their age, there were always tasks to be done. But for now, they stayed where they were, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted 25 years and would last as long as they both drew breath. The frontier had tested them, shaped them, tried to break them, but it had also given them each other. And that, Jake thought as he kissed his wife's forehead and felt her snuggle closer against the chill, was worth every hardship, every fear, every moment of doubt. Because Diana Denholm had been sent as a joke, but he'd seen her heart and made her his bride, and in doing so, he'd made himself whole again. They were home, both of them, finally and forever, and that was the happy ending they'd both earned.